Rick Jackson supports Georgia's anti-abortion law, which bans the procedure, as you know, as early as 6 weeks and includes exceptions for rape and incest. Well, the AJC obtained a recording of a campaign stop Jackson made in East Georgia where a voter pressed him about the law. The voter claimed that she was worried that doctors could fudge records to claim that her pregnancy was earlier than it was. And she asked Jackson what he would do as governor to stop that. He said he would make it against the law and doctors would need proof of the date. He said doctors wouldn't risk their license if it was implemented, which makes sense. The voter responded saying, quote, "I think you could make an example of 1 or 2 doctors." And Jackson reportedly responded, quote, "Absolutely." Now, that same voter asked about the law's rape exception, which she opposed, saying 2 wrongs don't make a right. And Jackson responded, quote, "You've still got life," appearing to agree with her. So let's bring in Brian and Theron. Brian, of course, again, we say that you are a consultant with the Jackson campaign. Put this in context for us.
I was with Rick that night in Walton County. It was a huge crowd. It's a loud crowd, and the recording is sort of hard to follow a little bit. But this is a case where Rick Jackson has owned the record with Georgia Life Alliance as being for the 3 exceptions: rape, incest, and the life of the mother. And Burt Jones is as well. So they have matching views on this issue. And Rick Jackson is a supporter of the current heartbeat law. He is not advocating for any changes to that law. He thinks it is a great law that promotes the sanctity of life. And when he talks about life in the womb, when he said absolutely is still life, that is his moral feeling. He does believe that that life is precious and that life is important. But what he has said in his public statements, particularly with that questionnaire where he said he was for the exceptions, is he would not then he would give the mother that choice if she so chose, as the current law would allow. Now, there's also talk in there about filing a police report to prove that you were raped. That is already in the law. So saying that he is for that is not for a change in the law, for taking a step further. That is already in there. If you're going to go in and get this procedure under the rape exception, then a police report is already required. So he's not advocating for anything different here. This is a left-wing tracker who is going around taping what he says and trying to take it out of context to make it sound like something that it is not. And this is not the first time it's happened on the campaign. Early in Columbia County, which is just outside of Augusta, suburban Augusta, there was a liberal tracker there holding up her camera in the audience and pretending to be a very strongly pro-life mother of 5 who did not want the heartbeat law because it wasn't conservative enough. She wanted a complete and total ban in Georgia and was pressing him to take that stand because they think he's going to be the nominee and they want to use that against him in a general election. So what this is dirty tricks by the Democrats. But look, Rick Jackson's very clear. This is what people need to take away. He supports the current law. He is not advocating for any changes to it.
All right, Theron, dirty tricks by your side.
Well, B-Rob is saying everything that, I knew he was going to say. And I think that let's go backwards. This is not dirty tricks by Democrats. The tracker, whoever he or she is, I'm not on the campaign trail. But I think the thing that's really interesting here is that while Rick Jackson does support the current law, would he actually support further restrictions? And I think that is the first question. The second thing here, Russ, it shows you that when you're on the campaign trail, you can't just trust anybody. The fact that this recording happened and it was a level of questioning, Rick Jackson has been on the campaign trail long enough now where he's got to be able to, sort of continue to talk about his stump speech. But the thing about what B-Rob just said, Russ, I think is so important. This is going to be, if Rick Jackson makes it as the nominee, a general election issue. Most women in the state of Georgia are pro-choice. I, as a black man, believe that a woman should be able to do what she decides to do with her body. Now, the 6-week abortion ban is something I think that has hurt Republicans, but it also hurt, I believe, Jeff Duncan in his race unsuccessfully for the Democratic nomination, because it was very hard for him to explain why he should get Democratic votes when he supported this ban. and was actually, voted to be a part of it. So look, it's something that Rick Jackson's campaign and Brian, did his job there to explain what he does and does not support. The question is that does it become an issue in a Republican primary and a runoff? And I think that anything, it causes a distraction and it's forcing the Jackson campaign to answer it. But these trackers are all over the place. They're all, doing things. And Russ, I'll make a bold prediction. I won't be surprised before June 16th. There's going to be some tracker that's going to come out with something that maybe Burt Jones has said. Other candidates running for Secretary of State and other runoffs and things like that. So it's a general election issue that I think can be hurtful to Rick Jackson if he's the nominee. But in a Republican primary right now for runoff, I don't know how much is going to affect him. But I will tell you that many women that I talk to are not supportive of this 6-week abortion ban that's currently law in the state of Georgia.
All right, Brian, let's try to put a fine point on it. You say Rick Jackson supports the current law, including the exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. Would he oppose further restrictions as governor?
Look, further restrictions aren't going to pass. When the heartbeat law passed, it passed by one vote in the House, and since that time, Democrats have picked up additional seats. So the vote simply would not be there to go beyond what we currently have. And so a defense of the current law is a conservative position to have. It is where pro-life people are. It is where Governor Kemp remains. And this idea that Georgians at large oppose the law has not held up to scrutiny. I do think that there was an assumption amongst many, including me, that this would be unpopular with the majority back when it passed in 2019. I think time has proved that I and many others were wrong. In fact, the support and disapproval of it is at pretty even levels when you look at the general election electorate in Georgia. And that plays out not just in polling, but in the fact that Democrats in 2020 and 2022 thought that this was going to be their ace in the hole. They were just going to run against the heartbeat law, and that was going to gin up this huge turnout with moderates who are pro-choice or not overly pro-life. And it just didn't happen. If it was polling through the roof as a major divide and driver of votes, it would have been the primary issue that Stacey Abrams ran on in 2022. And it wasn't. There is more pro-life people in this state than I think Democrats want to believe, and the numbers bear me out on that. And again, Rick Jackson is unapologetically pro-life, and what you heard there was him speaking sympathetically to a pro-life mom, and because he does share those values, he does believe in the sanctity of life. This is someone who has funded crisis pregnancy centers so that young moms who can't be moms but can deliver and give them up for adoption have a place to go and will have their needs taken care of. That's how passionately he feels about helping these children.
All right. Brian and Theron, thank you very much.